Is live for us in Tehran. We're hearing from the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi. Any update on Iran's position or preconditions for these talks?
Well, the situation in Tehran is very complicated. It seems like there is no clear intention for Iran to go and join the negotiating table in Islamabad. And at the same time, there is a flurry of diplomatic efforts in the past 24 hours, especially between Iran's foreign minister and Pakistan's foreign minister. There was two phone calls between them. And in the last one, we hear from Abbas Araghchi emphasizing the stance and the position of Iran's position, saying that the threatening rhetoric and also the attacks on the commercial vessels is a fundamental obstacle for joining the diplomatic process. So the situation is complicated, but there is no clear intention from Iran's to join the negotiating table, but might things change later in the coming hours.
Now, what about the state of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz? This is the sticking point, is it not? And of course, that Iranian cargo ship being boarded by US troops.
Yes, indeed, the naval blockade and the recent attack from U.S. Navy make the situation over the Strait of Hormuz is very complicated and very sensitive. The Iranian side and also the reaction from Iranian officials here comes from many officials, especially from Ismail Baqai, the spokesperson for Foreign Minister, and also from Khatamul Anbiya, which is the headquarters for armed forces here. The situation might be a retaliation from Iranian forces, as the commander of Khatamul Anbiya headquarters saying in the past 24 hours, there might be a retaliation, but they held their attack because there is a families of crew members, and they want to avoid the violation or to avoid the civilians' injuries in that shipping. So the situation there is very intricate, is very delicate, and might be any escalation or de-escalation. It's also upon the next few hours.
Al-Miqdad, thank you very much indeed. Al-Miqdad Ruhayd joining us live from Tehran. China has criticized that U.S. attack and seizure of an Iranian cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday. The foreign ministry urged all parties to take advantage of the window for peace and to restore the normal flow of traffic.
The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is sensitive and complex. China expresses concern over the United States' forced interception of relevant vessels and hopes that the parties concerned will act in a responsible manner, honors the ceasefire agreement, avoid aggravating confrontation and escalating tensions, and create the necessary condition for the restoration of normal passage through the strait.
Iran and Russia's foreign ministers have also held a phone call to discuss the ceasefire. Moscow says that Iran confirmed it'll be doing everything in its power to ensure uninterrupted passage of Russian ships and cargo through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Marco Vicenzino is a geopolitical risk specialist and a global strategy advisor, and he joins us now from New York. What's your read of the situation at the moment, Marco?
Listen, I think deep down inside, the reality is that Iran wants to negotiate, but the also reality is that it doesn't want to be perceived as negotiating from a position of weakness. Optics count a lot here because it doesn't want to be seen weak as it's among its own people internationally. And what I mean by that also is that it'll take what you call its reluctance. It'll demonstrate a reluctance to negotiate. But that reluctance is strategic. It's not emotional. It's transactional in many ways. And it's not in any way, I would say, conciliatory. By putting up such a face, by putting up such a posture, being gradual, being methodical, it wants to also have key states and key countries sort of help out in the process to mediate. Once again, it provides that mediation, third-party mediation, particularly from a big country like China, that can help save face It can provide off ramps. It can help with climb downs. I think in this sense, Iran, what it really wants to do, also by buying time and taking the slow, gradual route, what it does is it expands the portfolio beyond purely the nuclear agenda. They want to involve also the idea of sanctions, of lifting of sanctions, and other ones such as security guarantees. So what they're trying to do is play a very slow game, not to be perceived as dealing from a position of weakness.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, Marco, is here that the nuclear subject is the biggest sticking block, is it not? And is there a way of perhaps getting an off-ramp on that?
I mean, over the years, there's been several ones. I mean, one was that I think the U.S. recently rejected was a Russian proposal to take in, the Iranian nuclear material that's pretty much been under debate for a very long time, basically to store it. The U.S. rejected that. That had been something that was put on the table back even during the JCPOA, what you call the Obama deal. That was also put on the table, never was taken, but it's something, it's many things from the past, many topics from the past may be raised again, but perhaps obviously in a different form. So I think in this sense, it's not a short game. This is more of a long game we're taking here. It's going to require strategic patience. Whether the American side has that strategic patience to allow this to go on remains a big question mark. There may be a resort back to hostilities again, use of armed force, we call major hostilities. So Iran is, when it's in its pursuit of that long, gradual game, it also has to be fully aware that the clock is ticking and not to underestimate the patience of the American side here. So then once I go back to that point about strategic key allies of Iran or partners of Iran and not of the U.S. to get to the table and try to help facilitate this process. And I think in this sense, from the Iranian perspective, China has a major role to play because they come to the table with real leverage, real resources. They obviously need Iranian resources, which they purchase the majority of, and to be able to use the Chinese in a way, in their style of diplomacy, which is more reserved, behind the scenes, very calibrated rhetoric, to use the Chinese front as a way to be able to, you can say, kind of de-escalate or kind of make concessions, but not being seen as making concessions or actually being weak. That's where I think China right now has been involved in the process, but I think as time goes by, China will be increasingly playing a more prominent role.
Well, it is interesting to note that the Pakistani foreign minister actually did have a meeting before all this started with his Chinese counterpart. So that kind of reaffirms what you're saying, that there is China behind the scenes playing out a game of diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, listen, for them and for many other countries around the world, obviously trade is critical. If you don't have the movement of resources, of products, and particularly a country like China, which is basically the bottom line, it's the world's global assembly line, and plus all the energy, most of its energy, it's dependent upon the Middle East. As a result, it's not just a diplomatic role to play, it has a key economic vested interest in making sure that this crisis at least stabilizes and the Strait of Hormuz is opened, and commerce, at least, maybe not in a very 100% secure way, but at least the vessels are flowing into the Gulf and coming out of the Gulf itself. So I think right now they didn't want to go immediately to the front lines in terms of diplomacy. They've allowed, I think, backing the Pakistani process. But if that process doesn't start to yield results fairly soon, on the next days and weeks, you'll see an increased, a more prominent Chinese role and in direct involvement. So far, it's been behind the scenes and indirect, but I think it'll be increasingly get more involved publicly in order to ensure that there is not a return to the use of major hostilities and armed force.
Marco, do you have any grounds for optimism here?
I said optimism. I wouldn't say pessimism. I'd say realism. It's important to be realistic about this. One's expectations need to be kept in check and to be very, very sober. What I mean by that is understanding that this is not a conflict that just started in recent weeks. It didn't just start on February 28th. It was a stage of a wider conflict that's been going on for a very long time. And what's taking years and arguably decades, you're not going to be able to resolve in days and weeks. This is a very long process ahead that's going to require the participation of all major powers in order to prevent, like I said, another outbreak of major hostilities, which threatens to bring the world, the global economy, down a vicious downward cycle.
Marco, thank you. Marco Vicenzino, a geopolitical risk specialist, joining us there from New York.